Welcome to the Apostolic Forum. I'm Dana Thompson, and today we have a very exciting show for you. We're going to be talking about inheritance. And here to discuss this topic with me are two of my good friends and co-laborers in Christ Jesus. We have today Corbett Golden, all the way from San Angelo, Texas, the big state, the big star state. Is that correct, Corbett?
The Lone Star State.
Oh.
The Lone. But it is big.
I always want to think of everything big because, you know, the saying when I used to live in Texas is, everything's big.
Everything's big in Texas.
Well, Corbett will come back to you, but also I want to introduce Joe Oconte, who is basically no stranger to the Apostolic Forum. Joe, this is about your third or fourth time on, is that correct?
Yeah, I believe fourth time, yeah.
Welcome, guys.
Always good to be here.
Well, welcome. Corbett, this is your first time on the Apostolic Forum, so we usually have a tradition here. This is one of the traditions we think is godly.
Okay.
And that is we just ask you to, just spend a couple minutes to tell the viewers about yourself so they can attach your name probably with something they're familiar with.
Okay. Well, I don't know if they're not familiar with Texas. They might not be able to attach my name to anything, but been a Texan for almost 30 years. Before that, spent the early years of my life nearly all in Louisiana. Accumulated a number of degrees along the way and became eventually a college professor and continue to do that. Judy and I have two children who also live in Texas. One of them has the proud distinction of keeping our grandchildren for us. The other doesn't have any children, but we in Texas measure great distances as being okay, so our grandchildren are only 3 hours away, which is a couple hundred miles out there, and that's pretty close. So we enjoy that aspect of life. Long time ago, I had an opportunity to serve in Israel as a summer missionary with the Baptist Student Union program when I was in college, and that began, I think, to really deepen in me a sense of the ongoing continuity of the revelation of God, as opposed to a flash in the pan point of view about the New Testament. Really, that the New Testament was something that was prepared long in advance by the work of God in a people and in a place. And much of my life since then, the last 45 years, has been used in learning to understand and explain and to help people see and gain a proper appreciation for the totality of the revelation that God has given us. And so in these recent years, we've been pursuing these things with the saints and having a good time doing it.
Well, I tell you, we really enjoyed you this weekend. We had a 2-day retreat in Hagerstown, Maryland, and some of the things, hopefully, that was brought out in the retreat, we'll have opportunity to discuss some of these aspects here on the program today. Joe, you have anything else you wanted to add? I mean, we haven't seen you in it's been a while. Any updates or anything we need to know?
Well, let me see. Speaking about grandchildren, Maryland's a small state, so I have all my grandchildren mostly within a mile and a half.
Not 300 miles.
Not 300 miles. Other than that, and the fact that I'm going to get 3 more this summer.
Wow.
Which will take me up to 11. So
my goodness.
You invest in your children and you get an inheritance, grandchildren.
There you go.
Wonderful.
As I told my daughter once, my first grandchild, our granddaughter, was the reason I permitted her to live, so I could have grandchildren. So I understand.
Well, Joe, you said something very key because this is something I would like to talk about today. You say you invest in your children and then you actually receive grandchildren, which is your inheritance. And inheritance is what I wanted to talk about today. I know that term in and of itself is not really something that everybody grasps because not everyone receives an inheritance. I know for surety, I'm talking about from a natural standpoint. I'm the youngest of 6. I have 3 sisters and 3 brothers. Their names all start with D. My oldest sister name is Deborah. I have a sister named Denise, Donna. Oldest brother named Daryl, brother named Derek, and I'm Dana. So everybody used to sort of mistake me as a brunette or blonde. So I always went to my mom and I asked her, why did you name me Dana? She said, oh, because one of my favorite actors were Dana Andrews.
There you go.
And I'm like, so you mean my name was based upon a favorite actor?
Mine's based on a prize fighter, so you know.
A prize fighter, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
But just recently, I lost my mom within the last couple of years, and she was a tremendous blessing to me. And then my dad, you know how it usually goes when they're really close. You know, you lose one, the other follows not too far afterwards. Yeah. I lost my dad about 3 months right after that. But as far as inheritance, natural inheritance, at the time, my dad was in the military. He struggled. There wasn't much left to disperse among us, and I wasn't expecting anything from a natural standpoint. Right. But at the funeral, I didn't know this. This was an incredible witness and testimony, and actually it brought me to tears when we were actually at my dad's funeral. The soldiers that was there because he had a military barrel. Mm-hmm. Shot the gun. And then afterwards, of course, they come over to usually the wife to hand her the flag. But of course, my mom wasn't there. Right. And so I was looking for my brother, my oldest brother, my youngest brother, probably to receive the flag. Well, my oldest brother and youngest brother happened to be a Jehovah's Witness or have some Jehovah's Witness studies, so they can't receive a flag. Because in that particular faith, a flag is considered an idol. All right, so they couldn't receive it. And so they tapped me on the shoulder because I was bent over praying, and they tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Sir, would you receive this?" And I looked up and I received that flag, and I mean, it's like the presence of God, just hit me because I felt like that was my inheritance. That was my natural inheritance from my dad that he was passing on to me. So I know here we're talking about spiritual inheritance, but in order for people to understand spiritual things, like Romans 1:20 tells us, God uses the natural creation to teach us, what spiritual things are. Yes. So why don't you gentlemen start off by just laying out or sharing with us what exactly is inheritance and how do we see inheritance from a natural standpoint and from a spiritual standpoint?
Joe, you want to start, or?
I'll start since I know just a little bit. And this is more just anecdotal, but inheritance, normally, if you're a Rockefeller or a Kennedy or something, you're talking a lot of money, a lot of stuff, and that's part of it, absolutely. But inheritance, if I just look back to, say, my grandparents, both of my grandfathers died when I was like 8 and 10, so I knew them a little bit, but not much. So they didn't have much influence on me, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, my father's mother, okay, I inherited from her, okay, some money when she passed away, but far more, she set the shape and she communicated to all of her children and grandchildren certain things. She was an incredibly generous woman, okay, with her time, with her resources, okay. And when I look and see my brothers and sisters and my cousins, okay, I see we inherited that from her, if you will. That was something that she put on display, and it sunk in and it made us. And there was a number of other things about her, an uneducated woman. I mean, she was very intelligent, but in those days you only went to the 4th grade, and then you went out because you were a girl. Right. But I mean, she imparted so much to me personally, and then I go down to my my own father. I laugh with my brother sometimes because I'll do things, and and I'll look at him and say, "Is that Dad or what?" In other words, he never sat me down and say, think this way or act this way or this is the right, I mean, he told me right from wrong, but I mean, there's that aspect to me of inheritance that I value so much more. I really do, because not only has it shaped me, but it's shaped my children. Right. And to some extent will shape my grandchildren too. Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good, Joe. Corby, you want to add that?
Well, you know, Joe is speaking of things that we can think of as kind of legacy. There's an approach to life, a way of interacting with the world that's very much shaped by those important characters early in our lives. My own paternal grandfather and I were very, very close. I didn't really realize how poor he was until I was grown, but I enjoyed spending time with my grandparents, my dad's parents. I never knew my mom's parents. They died when she was a teenager. But there was a lot of very marked influence on me on the part of those grandparents. But I also noted as I grew older and understood things better that they had had a significant impact on my father, who was also a person who had a lot of influence. And there was a lot of richness in the legacy, although as we've already noted, frequently, far more often than not, there is not any kind of particular financial inheritance. I've said it in your presence in the past, and it's a true statement. Sometime after my grandfather died, I was not able to go to his funeral because I had just had surgery, but sometime after that, a month or so, somehow somebody put into my hands, I don't know how, a bathrobe that had been his in a nursing home. That was my inheritance from my grandfather. I still have that many, many, many decades later. And then after my father died, very similar situation. He and Mom had never really accumulated much of anything. And interestingly enough, all I came away with, if you want to call it from a tangible perspective, was another bathrobe. So I have 2 bathrobes. I don't use them in particular, but I do have that. Yeah. And those things are nothing but tangible reminders. But had we been a wealthy family, as Joe said, like a Rockefeller or a Kennedy, there would have been some other fairly substantial, very tangible aspect that would have shaped my life very differently than it was shaped by the legacy that I have from my forebears, my grandparents and my parents. Of course, we all hope, I think, to some degree that we'll be able to leave some tangible things for our children. But the real issue for us that we're looking at today is the spiritual legacy, the spiritual inheritance.
Yes.
And that thing is quite powerful. And we don't, I think, have a very good handle on what that is. The Scripture shows us in the Old Testament types and shadows and copies and things of that sort. Various references are made of that in different places in the New Testament, pointing back to what we can learn from what the grandfathers of the grandfathers of the grandfathers actually were passing down to us. And we see it tangibly. And so King David, for example, left his throne to the chosen son, Solomon.
Right.
Well, from Solomon's perspective, that was a pretty good inheritance, top notch. And Queen Elizabeth inherited the throne of England from her father. That's a pretty good inheritance. Big old allowance comes with that thing, not to mention a lot of prestige and so forth. And we find, if we study the patriarchs, that there is a lot more to that than we have paid attention to historically. For one thing, we've relegated the teachings of the Old Testament largely to the dustbin in modern Christianity.
Right.
And there's just so much there that can help us understand what is meant when an inheritance is discussed in the New Testament. For example, David, when he got the kingdom as a result of the death of Saul, he had a kingdom and he had a stature that came with that came from the man Samuel, who had bestowed that on him on the Lord's behalf.